In this video, I'll tell you a chilling and terrifying story about my visit to a mysterious night market, where I discovered that the vendors there were not human but creatures from another world. Let's begin! I had heard about the night market from a friend who had visited it previously and told me about the strange things happening there. Curiosity drove me to go and explore it for myself. We arrived at the location late at night, and the atmosphere was filled with mystery and tension. The dim lights and dark streets added a spooky touch to the place. Upon entering the market, I felt something odd. The vendors displayed bizarre and astonishing goods, things I had never seen before. As I wandered between the stalls, I noticed the eerie ambience. Whenever I approached a vendor, I felt an unnatural cold emanating from them, as if they were not living beings. I started to realize something horrifying when I noticed that the vendors had no reflection in the mirrors displayed in their stalls. Fear began to creep into my heart, but I tried to keep my composure and continue exploring. I approached a stall that showcased strange and sparkling jewelry. The vendor wore a dark cloak, and his face was hidden by the shadows of his hat. When I looked into his eyes, I felt like I was staring into an endless abyss. I asked the vendor about the price of one of the pieces, and he responded in a cold, inhuman voice. He spoke a language I did not understand, but I felt an implicit threat in his words. I tried to slowly back away without drawing attention, but I could feel his gaze following me. As I moved away from the stall, I noticed another visitor talking to a different vendor. Suddenly, the vendor lunged at him violently, and his face transformed into a terrifying creature with glowing eyes and sharp fangs. I frowned in place from fear, trying to process what was happening before me. Other visitors began to flee, but the path to the exit was blocked. The creatures moved with astonishing speed, chasing the visitors and capturing them. I realized I was trapped in this cursed market. I felt the ground shaking beneath my feet, as if the market itself was coming to life. I tried to escape through the dark alleys, avoiding the creatures that were pursuing me. At every corner, I encountered horrifying scenes, visitors turning into monstrous beings, vendors revealing their true faces, and incomprehensible events occurring around me. It felt like I was in a never-ending nightmare. Finally, I reached the market's exit, but then I realized I was no longer in the same world I had entered from. The atmosphere was entirely different, and the sky was covered with thick black clouds. I looked around and saw the remains of other market visitors, scattered and destroyed everywhere. I realized I had fallen into a trap from which there was no escape. The night market was more than just a place to sell bizarre goods. It was a gateway to another world, a world filled with terrifying creatures that thrived on human fear and souls. I tried to stay hidden, but I felt like I was being watched every moment. After long hours of hiding, I found myself in front of another vendor, this time looking entirely human. He spoke to me in an understandable language and told me that there was only one way to escape. I had to face the creatures and conquer my fear. It was the only way to survive. With all my courage, I decided to confront the creatures. I used every ounce of strength and bravery I had to fight them. The battle was terrifying, but I eventually managed to find the escape gate. As soon as I crossed through it, I found myself outside the night market, in the same place where I had started. I returned home exhausted and filled with fear, realizing that I would never go back to that night market. That experience always reminded me that there are other worlds full of evil and terror, and curiosity could lead us to places from which we cannot escape. As I lay in bed that night, the events of the night market haunted my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the monstrous faces of the vendors and heard the screams of the other visitors. Sleep was elusive, and when I did manage to drift off, my dreams were plagued with nightmares. The next morning, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps it was all just a vivid dream or a hallucination brought on by some unknown cause. But deep down, I knew the truth. The night market was real, and so were the creatures that inhabited it. In the days that followed, I became increasingly paranoid. I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and I often heard faint whispers that sent chills down my spine. My friends noticed my change in behavior, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full story. How could I explain something so unbelievable? One evening, as I was walking home, I saw a familiar figure standing under a streetlight. It was the vendor who had spoken to me in the market, the one who seemed human. He beckoned me over, and despite my fear, I approached him. "You need to come with me," he said in a low voice. "The market is not finished with you." A cold wave of dread washed over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. There is a balance that must be maintained. You escaped, but the market demands a price, he replied, his eyes reflecting a sadness that I couldn't comprehend. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm and pulled me into a dark alley. The world around me blurred, and I felt a dizzying sensation, as if I was being pulled through a vortex. When the spinning stopped, I found myself back in the night market. This time, the market was even more sinister. The vendors' faces were twisted into grotesque masks of malevolence, and the air was thick with an oppressive, suffocating darkness. The vendor who brought me here stood beside me, his expression grim. "You have one chance to set things right," he said. "Find the heart of the market and destroy it. Only then can you break the curse." He handed me a dagger with an ornate handle and disappeared into the shadows. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The market seemed endless, a labyrinth of horrors with no clear path. Steeling myself, I ventured deeper into the market. As I navigated through the twisted stalls, the creatures grew more aggressive. They lunged at me from the darkness, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. I fought them off with a dagger, each encounter leaving me more exhausted and desperate. Finally, I reached the center of the market. There, in a clearing surrounded by flickering torches, stood a massive, pulsating heart. It was suspended in the air, veins and arteries snaking out from it like dark tendrils. The sight of it filled me with revulsion and fear, but I knew what had to be done. I raised the dagger and plunged it into the heart. A deafening scream echoed through the market as the heart writhed and convulsed. The ground beneath me shook violently, and the creatures let out anguished cries. The heart exploded in a shower of black ichor, and everything went dark. When I awoke, I was lying on the pavement outside the night market's entrance. The street was empty, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. I stumbled to my feet, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The market was gone, and the curse was broken. I returned home, forever changed by the experience. The nightmares eventually faded, but the memory of the night market lingered. I had survived, but I knew that the horrors I had faced were real. The market had taken a part of me, leaving me with a deep, lingering fear of the unknown. I never spoke of the night market again, but I always kept the dagger close, a reminder of the darkness I had confronted. And though the market was gone, I knew that other realms of terror still existed, waiting for the curious and the unwary to stumble upon them.